All right, so the question was asked how to create a render over an HDR environment. So you can see like this environment here, including a shadow catcher, and then use the depth pass in order to add depth of field in post, like in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is just do a real quick run through of kind of the procedure that I use, and then you can see how I do this. There are other ways to do this, but I find this to be relatively the easiest way to get something that works and looks pretty good pretty quickly. So the first thing that you're going to do is go ahead and get your camera set up. Let's go ahead to my camera view. Set up so that you're pretty much aligned to the environment. Here, let's go ahead and turn my inactive meshes back to wireframe and select just the car. There we go. So you can see I've got it lined up so it's pretty much on the ground here. And then I took the shadow catcher itself. Let's hop back out to a perspective view. And so the shadow catcher then is expanded relatively large. So you can see it's pretty big compared to the car. The initial shadow catcher only was about as big as the sphere here for the environment. So, so I wanted that to extend out pretty far. And the reason for that is I want to have this extended out far enough that I can include any level of kind of infinite depth. So, you know, you're only going to have so far that is going to have a different depth of field level to where if you try to focus on that, you know, it's just everything's going to focus the same. So, so at this point, I've got this extended out pretty far, and then I got a good angle, turn my car to a comfortable direction, how I liked it, and there we go. So that's all there is really for the setup here. So the next thing that you have to do is add a depth output. And make sure that you check remap pixel values, because if you don't do that, here, let's hop over to our depth output here, and I'm going to uncheck, and let's unpause that. So with that unchecked, you see we just get pretty much black and white here, and this is going to be really difficult to manage. So what we can do is if we remap the pixel values, you can then input a maximum depth. In this case, for this image, it was at 20.8 meters, and the way that you come to that is, like, the default here is 10. So let's go up to 10 and we'll see what we get here. So there we are at 10 meters. You can see that we're getting a very heavy cutoff right here in the middle of the car, so obviously not far enough. You can see that my camera is back a little ways and then zoomed in, just to kind of keep any weird perspective distortion or anything like that there. So, so there's the camera, there's the car. This is at 10 meters, the default. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ramp this up, and usually I'll go pretty far until you start to see a lack of gradation in the horizon. So right now you can see that we go light gray, darker gray, and it cuts straight to black. That's not what we want. At that kind of depth, we're always going to end up with some clipping where we get some strange artifacts between how this edge is rendering when we do the depth of field and how the background is. So what you'd want to do then is you want to dial this back to a point where you start to lose the horizon. So let's go back down to about where I was. See, there you can see now we get this shift until it goes to the horizon, but then it just kind of fades the rest of the way out to black. And that's going to give us pretty much what we need to get rid of any kind of line or weird jumps in our blur here. So you can see that the car here, we still get a fair amount of depth in the car, so that's going to work out for us. And then we go there, we don't have any clipping, so that should be good. Now, if you have a more complex environment, so, you know, say we have some larger rocks or something like this in here, it's a good idea to then go in and actually add some depth to your shadow catcher. This one you can see actually, if you look really closely, has, and actually it works better if I dial this in, you can see that there is a little bit of a displacement map on it. So what that's doing is that's just giving the effect of the little pebbles and things on the displacement map. Now, if you have something bigger, it'd be a good idea to go in and model or sculpt something like that. And if anybody would like, go ahead and comment. I can actually do a short video on how to set that up. But you'd want to put those in and include those. Otherwise, some weird things will happen with the depth. But for something relatively simple like this, where we're just looking at a basic render, here, let's hop over. I got this open in Photoshop, all rendered. You know, there's nothing really of much consequence depth-wise until we get you know, back a ways, and then there are these bushes, but really those are pretty short too. So you could even go all the way back to there without needing anything, and then if you do go back past there, it's going to be a relatively subtle difference, so you may or may not need anything on those. But if you get something a little bit bigger, you may need to add that in. But you know, for this case, we don't need anything. So that's going to keep this tutorial simpler. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to grab my depth output. If I pull that up to the top, you can see it. Once we're here in Photoshop, we actually see the gradation a little bit better. So you can see it really fades out very nicely. And if I toggle it on and off, you can see the fade line is right here, or just around this break in the hood. And so it's fading out actually behind those bushes, but that's okay because I think those are relatively short, so there's not much problem with that. All right, so with this here, let's go ahead. I'm going to take this and copy it. So Control A, Control C. If you'd like, you could run something like a levels pass here, and you could adjust this so you get a little bit more contrast. I found that if you actually have some clipping here, though, you really don't get much more depth out of it, so it's really not improving much. It actually can just cause a little bit more kind of lines in your depth render, so I usually don't do that. But if you feel like that's necessary, you can do that. So I'm going to select all that, copy. Let's go ahead and hide that. Actually, I can move it back down. And then in channels, I'm going to go down to channels and create a new channel. Alpha 1 is fine. I'm just going to paste this into that. So now we have an alpha 1 that's totally separate and contains our depth information. All right, so let's go ahead here to grab our final color output, and I'm actually going to duplicate this just so that we can see the difference. And then we'll go filter, blur, lens blur, and make sure that you have the source set to alpha 1. By default, this is going to go to none, at which point really the lens blur is essentially just like a slightly fancier Gaussian blur that will give you some lens shape artifacts, nothing that special. But if you turn on the source map, we set that to alpha 1, you can see that that is going to focus now on a different grayscale value. So anywhere you click here in the viewport, it's going to pick up the grayscale value that's in that alpha 1 channel, and then it's going to apply that as the depth for in focus. Anything lighter than that will be out of focus near. Anything darker than that will be out of focus far. So if you can actually click and drag. If your computer's relatively modern, you can get the Creative Cloud thing popping up. If you have a relatively modern computer, you should be able to pretty much just kind of drag slowly across the surface, and you'll see the depth of field change. And right now I've got this set very heavy. A radius of 25 is pretty extreme for this kind of an image. You can see even the back of the car is a little out of focus, and it's probably definitely too shallow there. So let's focus in here on, I don't know, the headlights, something like that. And then I'm going to set my radius back down. I do like to keep the radius high when I'm adjusting what's in focus, because it can help you pinpoint things a little bit more easily. Then I'm going to back this off to somewhere around, I don't know, 10. Something like that, and it's going to get a little nicer looking. So I know that my my focal distance of 139 is working, but you can also kind of drag through here and check. Now, one thing to note is if you want the background in focus, you'll start to get some artifact line here where the car, even though it is out of focus, its edge is not out of focus, and same thing here with the antenna. So that can be a point where you start to get some difficulty with this process. You'll either need to go in and adjust the edge by hand, or you'll need to actually then start using the modo depth of field on the camera, in which case you'll get a nicer result, but you won't get the ability to kind of scrub over the image and adjust it live, because yeah, it takes a while to render. So so that's going to do it for that. Let's go ahead and click OK, and there we go. We have our depth of field rendered image. There's our no depth. There is the depth. See, we don't have any, if we look here in the background where this resolution is, we don't have any kind of line or seam or anything weird going on. We get a pretty easy fade out, and everything works pretty well there. All right, so that does it for that. So that's how you use the depth pass, and you use your shadow catchers appropriately inside of Modo in order to be able to control depth of field in post. Go ahead and hit the like button if you'd like to see how to use the ambient occlusion output in a way that isn't just dragging it to the top, setting its mode to multiply, and then just adjusting the opacity. There's a lot more you can get out of the ambient occlusion output if you use it with a few extra options inside of Photoshop. So hit the like button if you'd like to see another video on that. That does it for this one. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.